When you were in elementary, one of the first artists, if not the first artist you learned about, was Vincent van Gogh. And after the teacher showed you his wonderful artwork, she would drop the fun fact, did you know he cut off his ear and gave it to a girl he loved? And we all lived the rest of our educational careers wholeheartedly believing that Van Gogh was a crazy artist, equally brilliant as he was insane. But that's actually not the true story. Hey, what's up? It's Wellboy, and in this video, I'm going to clear the air about the story behind Van Gogh's ear and how what we're told is actually wrong. But first, I need to give you the background info that led up to this tragic event. In order to understand the type of person Van Gogh was, you need to know how he grew up. Vincent van Gogh had a strict childhood. He was born in a very religious area in the Netherlands to very religious parents. His mom, Anna Cornelia Carbentus, was a talented watercolor artist from an influential family in The Hague, which for those that don't know is the unofficial capital of the Netherlands, because that's where all the administrative work is done, although the official capital is Amsterdam. His father, Theodorus van Gogh, was a minister for the Dutch Reformed Church, and his side of the family were big names in the art dealing business. Even though they married in their early 30s, they managed to have 4 kids, Cornelius, Vincent, Wilhelmina, and Theo. Before these 4, they had a child who was a stillbirth, and this baby was going to be named Vincent. They ended up reusing the name for Vincent, the artist we know. One thing I do want to say about Vincent van Gogh being named after his deceased brother is that a lot of people believed he developed psychological issues because maybe he perceived himself to be a replacement child or that he was a reincarnation of his brother. Maybe passing by a gravestone with his exact name on it on his way to school changed the way he thought about life. Maybe he felt he was trying to live up to this example of a perfect child that never existed and always felt he would face rejection from his family if he didn't meet that standard. Well, there's actually no hard evidence to say whether he was affected by this or not, and he never talked about it in his famous letters to Theo, so I guess we'll never know. We can't really talk more about Vincent without mentioning how important his brother Theo was. Not only were the two really close, but Theo basically supported Vincent's art career throughout his whole life. Theo really believed in his brother and made sure he got whatever he needed in terms of food, shelter, and art supplies. Theo was a successful art dealer who worked in the Van Gogh family business. So even though he struggled a bit, he was able to support his own family as well as Van Gogh's career. And unfortunately, I have to put the word career in quotes because as many of you know, during Vincent van Gogh's life, he was never successful in selling his paintings. From an early age, Vincent van Gogh did not fit in. He started developing what was described as a sort of depression in middle school, which affected his studies under the highly regarded artist Constant Cornelius Huysmans, who I'll quickly mention has his paintings in the Louvre to this day. When Vincent was older, an uncle on the Van Gogh side of the family got him a job at the family art dealership. This was a great period in his life since he was spending time with his family. He got to look at a bunch of art every day, and he was making a ton of cash from the job. The problem with this job didn't come from the job itself, but the fact that he developed a major crush on his landlady's daughter while she was already engaged to another dude. After she rejected him, he quit art dealing and turned to religion, where he tried his hand at being a minister like his father. It didn't last long, and he got the boot because everyone agreed his sermons were boring. Later on, he found himself working in the coal mines. He started to take art more seriously, and all the experts will say he became fascinated by the people and scenery around him. Though in my uneducated opinion, he had a really stressful job and poor living conditions, so to take his mind off of things, I imagine he got into sketching. It's not like this happened out of the blue. His mom did teach him what she knew about art when he was little, and he did spend those middle school years in art school. It just seemed now that as an adult, he was getting into art on his own volition. Anyway, to move the story further along and not waste your time, I'll cut the life events a little short and just say he bounced around all over Europe in his 20s. From England to France and back to the Netherlands, he took odd jobs, and he pursued a few women. None of these relationships lasted too long because he either couldn't support them as he was always broke, or they were his cousin, and she was grossed out at the thought. Our guy just couldn't catch a break. Eventually, he moved to Paris with Theo, and while living there, they would soon meet a man named Paul Gauguin. And as we'll see, Gauguin was an important figure leading to the night Van Gogh removed his own ear. So who was Paul Gauguin? Gauguin was a Frenchman who was a successful artist with many artist friends like Camille Pissarro and Paul Cézanne. He made some money painting, but his main source of income was being a stockbroker. He was very different from Van Gogh when it came to having his finances in order, at least at first. Because once the stock market crashed in 1882, Gauguin decided to pursue painting full-time, since he had nothing to lose and his only viable source of income now came from selling his art. Unfortunately, this decision caused his wife of 11 years, a Danish-French teacher named Mette Sophie Gad, to leave him as she was now the chief breadwinner of the family. And back in those days, this was seen as very shameful. Insulted, he cut off all contact with her and his 5 children, never seeing them again, and moving back to Paris from Copenhagen. Gauguin was known for having a big ego and belittling those around him. It even cost him his friendship with Camille Pissarro, who was the first person to help him get a foothold in the art community. Some speculate that his aggressive personality was a byproduct of being an accomplished boxer and fencer, but it could also have been a byproduct of him being French. Like Van Gogh, Gauguin was very interested in the emerging post-impressionist movement, and he spent a lot of time with the artists who were spearheading this new form of art. So it was only a matter of time until he would run into Vincent van Gogh and his art-dealing brother Theo. While in Paris towards the end of 1887, Theo and Vincent van Gogh became acquainted with Paul Gauguin. By this time, Gauguin was a struggling artist just like Van Gogh, and they had a few discussions about life and art itself. At an art exhibition Van Gogh organized at a hip restaurant, he and Gauguin exchanged art with each other, cementing their artistic relationship. Although there were many benefits to living around other artists and a larger market with the potential to sell his art in, Van Gogh grew weary of life in Paris and moved to the small town of Arles, which is on the other side of France. While in Arles, his work ethic was firing on all cylinders. He created more than 200 paintings and more than 100 watercolors of his drawing. Van Gogh always had the dream of starting an art colony where tons of artists could come and paint the local scenery with him, then combine their ideas and painting styles to usher in a brand new era of art that would leave behind the Impressionist movement that was popular at the time. The center point of Van Gogh's vision would be known as the Yellow House, a place where artists could visit or live if they so chose to. So with that in mind, he leased the eastern wing of the building and began his work from there. While figuring out who should be the first artist to invite and start the process of beginning the art colony, the man that instantly came to mind was Émile Bernard. Bernard was a successful artist that Van Gogh met in Paris and formed a good relationship with, but sadly he was going away for military service, which put him out of the picture. His second choice was none other than Paul Gauguin. Now, Gauguin, being the guy he is, didn't really see any benefit in traveling all the way to Arles and living with Van Gogh, as he didn't see them as equals. He considered Van Gogh to be lacking when it came to being articulate, and to him this was a sign of unintelligence. Still, he was drowning in debt and had caused various dramas with all the other artists in Paris, so it was decided he might as well make the trip to Arles. The main motivating factor was not mutual adoration or respect, but a promise from Theo that he would support him financially if he stayed with Vincent. Theo was already contributing a quarter of his salary to Vincent, which put a strain on things, but recently he was left money from a deceased uncle, and believed he could keep costs down if Vincent and Gauguin would live together in the Yellow House. Gauguin seemed to like the idea of an art colony, but believed it should be established in the tropics, and Arles was as far from the tropics as you could get. To Van Gogh, the countryside and his farms were beautiful. He found inspiration in small-town life as well. He painted 2 of his most famous paintings, Night Café and Café Terrace at Night, while staying in Arles. But Gauguin would not be impressed. He would come to find the area lacking in any aesthetic quality. The tropical island of Tahiti was the only thing on his mind when it came to his future. So the plan was to stay for a few months in Arles, then head straight to Tahiti. In anticipation for Gauguin's arrival, Van Gogh chugged a lot of coffee and created 4 versions of the famous sunflowers painting to be displayed in the Yellow House. He also lovingly created these 2 matching paintings called Vincent's Chair with His Pipe and Paul Gauguin's Armchair. To me, this indicates that Van Gogh was already idealizing their relationship before Gauguin even got there, and most definitely had the wrong idea about the future of their partnership. On one hand, you had Van Gogh trying to settle down and form an art colony in what was basically the ass end of France, On the other hand, you had Gauguin seeing the visit as a quick restroom break on the trip to his tropical paradise Tahiti. This issue would go on to be a constant and looming source of tension during Gauguin's stay. Paul Gauguin arrived in Arles on October 23, 1888 at 5 a.m. after a long 2-day trip on the train. Nobody was waiting at the station for him, and he had to ask the local barkeep where to find Van Gogh. He was immediately struck by the state of the Yellow House. It was in shambles and messy because Van Gogh was messy and in shambles. The people and setting of Arles did not match up to the extraneous praise Van Gogh had given them, and he made no comment on Van Gogh's recent paintings. The surprising thing that Van Gogh quickly came to admire about Gauguin were his domestic skills. Immediately after moving in, he cleaned the whole house and set up a monthly budget for them. This included allotments for food, drink, rent, and at the very top of his list, hygiene. He wasn't calling Vincent dirty, although he probably was. Hygiene was Gauguin's code word for the brothel. And Paul Gauguin loved going to the brothel. Vincent, who suffered many ailments, physical, mental, and venereal, didn't have as much enthusiasm. While Gauguin's personal finance skills were excellent on paper, in practice it was a whole nother story. Vincent wrote that for 3 to 4 days they would stick to the budget, but then Gauguin would go on a massive drinking binge and the budget would go out the window. While Vincent did have problems with alcohol consumption, he was not a binge drinker. As Van Gogh and Gauguin grew accustomed to being around one another, they also grew comfortable with having intense arguments with each other. Both men were very emotional and passionate about their viewpoints, so oftentimes during disagreements their tempers flared, especially when ignited by all the absinthe and brandy they were drinking. During their interactions, Gauguin would constantly make comments about moving on, preferably to some tropical, more primitive culture of the Tahitian variety. This would upset Van Gogh to no end. Growing paranoid, there were times Gauguin would wake up in the middle of the night to find Van Gogh standing over him, watching him. When Gauguin would ask what the matter was, Vincent wouldn't say a word and return to bed. In a rare moment of decency and self-awareness, Gauguin would write to a friend saying he owed a lot to the Van Gogh brothers, admitting that in spite of some discord, he could not be angry with an excellent fellow who was sick, who suffers, and who asks for me. He would go on to reassure Vincent that he would stay, although he admitted he might at some point feel bound to leave. This was not an attempt at manipulation, but in fact an honest statement. One day they decided to paint each other's portrait. Gauguin's portrait of Van Gogh painting sunflowers came off to Vincent as unflattering, saying, "It is certainly me, but it's me gone mad." Personally, I think it's very cool that we have a portrait of Van Gogh in the middle of working on one of his paintings. It's like a behind-the-scenes look before there ever was such a thing. Later on that same evening, the two men went to a cafe where Vincent ordered absinthe and, for no apparent reason, threw it at Gauguin's head. Gauguin dodged it, then lifted up Vincent, or so he claims, and carried him all the way back to the Yellow House. The next day, in the morning, Vincent said sorry. Although Gauguin accepted the apology, he told Vincent if it ever happened again, he was going to have to respond physically. He also told Vincent he wasn't going to take that chance, so Gauguin wrote to Theo asking if he could return to Paris. After sending that letter, he started to feel guilty about it and then announced he changed his mind and wouldn't be leaving after all. But Vincent wasn't convinced. He only grew more paranoid about Gauguin leaving, and his dream of the Yellow House was fading fast. On December 23rd, tension was at an all-time high in the Yellow House. So high that Paul Gauguin decided to take a walk around the neighborhood after dinner, despite it being a rainy night. Van Gogh stayed home to finish his portrait of Madame Roulin and her baby. On his walk, Gauguin crossed into the town square when he heard footsteps rapidly approaching him from behind. It was Vincent. He was holding an open razor in his hand. In an account of the night, a decade after Van Gogh's death, Gauguin tells us he stood his ground and simply glared at Vincent with a vacant stare, which made Van Gogh stop dead in his tracks and run the other way. This account is uncorroborated. After this, exactly what happened with Vincent is not entirely clear, and only Vincent knew for sure what he did later that night, because Gauguin checked into a hotel and didn't return home. At 11:30 p.m., Van Gogh turned up at the local brothel and asked for a girl named Rachel. It seems that this was a woman of the night he had some familiarity with, although it was no more than a purely client-to-service worker relationship. He presented her with a tiny package wrapped in newspaper and quickly left. It was the lower part of his ear, which he severed with the razor blade he was carrying earlier. You can imagine Rachel's reaction. Immediately after, police were called and the ear was taken into custody. After discovering the identity of the ear's owner, police arrived at the yellow house early the next morning. It was Christmas Eve and there were bloody towels littering the floor of the house. Upstairs lay Van Gogh, the mangled remains of his ear staining his bed covers a deep red. At this point, Gogh had arrived, and seeing a crowd around the yellow house, he hurried forward, but was halted by a police officer. "What have you done to your comrade, monsieur?" he yelled. Investigators soon realized Van Gogh was only sleeping and not actually dead. After insisting to the police he had nothing to do with it, Gogh left the scene. But before taking off, he asked them to tell Vincent when he woke up that he had left for Paris, as he was afraid the mere sight of himself might be enough to kill him. Then he went to telegraph Theo. At the hospital, Van Gogh was treated by a young doctor in training named Felix Ray. The ear was brought to the hospital, but by then, too much time had already passed, and there was no use in attempting to reattach it. Nothing was the same for Vincent after this incident, and the dream of the yellow house would never be made a reality. In the days after his episode, the authorities ordered that he be checked into a mental institution. During this time, Vincent repeatedly and unsuccessfully asked for Gogh, but Paul was gone, and they would never see each other again. After he was released, he spent a year in Saint-Remy, and in 1890, his works were displayed in a private members-only gallery in Brussels, Germany. But Van Gogh himself wasn't able to attend due to the state of his mental health. At this gallery, his work received praise from legendary painter Claude Monet, saying his work was the best in show. Fellow artist Henri Toulouse-Lautrec almost got into a duel over Van Gogh when Henri de Gogh insulted Vincent's paintings and Lautrec demanded satisfaction. Paul Signac even stepped in and claimed he would duel de Gogh if Lautrec surrendered. De Gogh apologized for his comments and was kicked out of the gallery. Van Gogh spent the last few months of his life painting in Auvers, where he tragically perished from a self-inflicted bullet wound on July 27, 1890, at the age of 37, never knowing the impact he would go on to have, not only in the art community, but on the world as a whole. As for Paul Gauguin, he did end up setting sail for Tahiti, vowing to return a rich man and make a fresh start. But in stark contrast to his vision of a primitive, ideal setting, he arrived devastated to see a colony that was already so influenced by the French and European cultures. He also found that he was unable to afford the pleasure-seeking lifestyle he was aiming for, and the first portrait he painted there of local social figure Suzanne Bainbridge was not well liked. After creating more paintings in Tahiti, he sent 9 of them back to Paris, where they would be displayed in a joint gallery alongside the late Vincent van Gogh's artworks. Though the gallery was well received, he only sold 2 of his Tahiti-made paintings, and his pre-Tahiti artworks were unfavorably compared to Van Gogh's. The rest of Gauguin's life can only be described as equal parts messy and miserable. When he returned to France after 3 years in Tahiti, he left behind a 13-year-old native wife, whom he had a child with, never seeing them again. While in France, he had hoped to rekindle his marriage to his first wife, Met, but they only ever spoke through letters. In those letters, they fought over money, eliminating the idea he could return to that family. After 2 years, he was dirt poor and was receiving charity from friends, but one of them managed to find him a cheap ticket back to Tahiti, so off he went, never setting foot in Europe again. He spent the last few years of his life making art and suffering through various ailments, like a broken ankle that didn't heal properly, painful sores that began erupting up and down his leg, which were treated with arsenic, and heart problems caused by cardiovascular syphilis, a disease he caught from all that hygiene he enjoyed so much. This caused his vision to deteriorate, leading to him needing glasses. Time went by, he had a few petty dramas with the locals and the island's government. He painted a few more pictures, he had a few more children with native miners, then he died suddenly on the morning of May 8, 1903, at the age of 54. It's hard to say whether his death was caused from a laudanum overdose, due to the chronic pain he was dealing with and as evidenced by an empty bottle found at his bedside, or by a simple heart attack, but his pastor chose to declare it was the latter. Although Van Gogh and Gauguin never physically saw each other again, they did manage to keep in touch during Vincent's last years by writing each other letters, and they were even in talks about starting an art studio in Belgium. But sadly, neither one of them would live long enough to see this idea come to fruition. So it goes. Now you know the real reason Van Gogh lost his ear. If anybody tells you any different, you can show them this video. But hey, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a thing or two. If you want to know more about me and what the channel is about, I made an entire video explaining just that. And you can click on it right here. So I'll see you guys in the next video.